Welcome back, everybody, to the Virtual Summit. I'm Sujin. Today, I've got the pleasure of speaking to Cynthia Barnes of the National Association of Women Sales Professionals. Cynthia, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. How are you?
Great. So Cynthia, how'd you get started in this whole thing?
Well, I've been a sales professional for over 20 years. I used to say that how long I've been in sales until I had someone in one of my sessions say, wow, that's longer than I've been alive. So I simply say now that I've been selling since Girl Scout cookies were $1.50 a box. Sales is in my blood. It's who I am. And after getting to the top 1% of a multitude of verticals, everything from logistics to higher education to pharmaceuticals, I sat down one day in 2016 and I said, the true test of whether or not you're successful, Cynthia, is not measured in how well you do. It's actually measured, and I want to be known for how well I help the multitude of people get to the top 1%. So that's why I started NAWSP as a way to take everything that I knew and learned and half the stuff that I forgot, and I could deliver it to other women sales professionals so that they could get to the top 1%.
Absolutely love it. It sounds like you learned everything the hard way, despite of what's out there in training, education, coaches, folks out, mentors, whatever. You figured it out in yourself, and now you're going to be that person to help spearhead this thing. I love that. We were talking earlier before we started recording about sales training, and so we talked about, like, a lot of the sales training is for men by men, and you said it way better than I did, and you mentioned a few people. Do you mind just jumping into that or talking about that?
Sure. In 2016, I thought about the sales training that I had access to, and I taught myself how to sell. I was one of those people that would get every cassette, yes, I'm dating myself, and I would listen to those and CDs and go to conferences and read all types of books. And I slowly began to realize that all of that sales training that I had was by men, for men, created for men at a time when men made up the whole sales force. And so I said in 2016, how much faster could women get to the top 1% if we had sales training and sales approaches created by women for women that took into account the unique challenges that we face, as well as amplified the innate strengths that we have. So that's how I got started.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, you can't put a square peg in a round hole, right? You've gotta have content, and content catered to the right folks and right type. It's like you're telling someone to sell pharmaceuticals, but they've only done software. Right. How the heck are they supposed to transition without the right training? So I love that. Also, some of the folks at the time the training was done is so old. Like, it's like, yes, it's the fundamentals. It works and whatnot, but it needs to be updated anyways. Like, there needs to be a newer version with cell phones in mind and phones being used for internet more than actual phones, right? It's like right. That changes everything. So anyways, I guess, one of the things I want to ask you is, I guess, like, what are some of the challenges women face in the B2B, B2C kind of sales world that, the boys club, as you'd call it, or sometimes that's what it feels like.
Sometimes it is. And before I start, let me say that there's nothing wrong with traditional sales approaches. When I created the sales training for women by women, I wanted women to have options. After all, the sales training that I went through that was created by men for men got me to the top 1%. So again, there's nothing wrong with it. This is an and economy, not an or economy. So I want women to have options. Yes, I want this, and I have access to this. Let me pick and choose which one is going to be the best for me. So as far as some of the challenges that women in sales face, they can be as simple as, how do I navigate a bro culture, both within my organization and selling to a predominantly male industry? For example, in logistics, you have to learn how to deal with all men, because the majority of men that you're calling on are all men and they're blue collar. So how is it that you need to structure your conversation? So if you go back to those traditional sales methods, they give you scripts. And some of those scripts, when said by a woman, don't come out sounding as great as they can if they're said by a man. There's certain things that are not well received if they're said by a woman and designed by men. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
So a lot of women are having to say, okay, well, you know what? I said what was in the book or what was at that conference. I used that script and that sounded totally inauthentic. So how do I take that with the same objective in mind and how do I tweak it to make it sound more like me? So some women actually have to do double duty, and that takes away from the effectiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're pitching with the best script that's, guys have used for years, it's closed deals, but the person on the other end hasn't built the trust with you, or you can't pull off saying that because they're not listening just yet, or you don't have their brain yet. You may have their ears, whatever, it doesn't work. So I totally get like having to adjust the pitch, the approach.
Mm-hmm.
And also I do a lot of video recording, and I don't use scripts. I hate them. I use like an outline, and I just kind of say whatever I have planned to say. But the one time I did script, I was like, it was just the worst video possible. It's like I can't read through that. That's not how I say stuff. So I get it from that aspect, but of just not being authentic about it, just that part.
Yes.
But there's obviously challenges, but I feel like there's also a lot of unique like strengths.
Yes.
I think from kind of looking you up before the call, before this, I think there's a lot of things women can do better and have advantages. Can you share some examples or things that are strengths?
Sure. Relationships. Women are natural relationship builders. So when you have traditional sales training that spends a whole day on how to build relationships, that's almost a waste of time for women because that's something that we do naturally. So instead of focusing on teaching us how to build relationships, focus on other things that are challenges for us. We're also great at empathy, emotional intelligence. These are things that come naturally to us. So in the sales process, if we can tap into those things that we do well already, we have a leg up.
That makes sense. I want to talk about voice and kind of personalization a bit. So we talked about like earlier, like the training for men by men doesn't seem authentic when a woman says it. And somebody has to do double duty to kind of find their voice. How do you find your authentic voice? Like male, female, whatever. Like how do you go about that?
There are three things. Number one, you have to take a look at who do you want to be, i.e., how do you want to show up? And sometimes it's as simple as creating a personal mission statement to say, this is who I am, and this is how I want to appear in the sales process. The second thing is to identify when the imposter syndrome comes and rears its ugly head, because women and men are plagued by the imposter syndrome. Someone telling you, hey, you know what, you have no right to be here. You're too old, too young, too ignorant, whatever it is. So you have to silence that, the imposter syndrome. And the last thing is the inner critic. The inner critic will tell you that, again, you are not supposed to be here and you're not good enough. So the inner critic and the imposter syndrome go hand in hand. We need to silence those, figure out a way that women can say, you know what, stop. This is what my head's telling me, but this is not completely accurate. And once you do that, you can then show up as your best self and sell how you sell, not necessarily how a book told you to sell.
Gotcha. And then once you figure that out, is there, it's just kind of talking about personalization. Once you figure out the authenticity and voice, can you then just kind of apply that to how you personalize the scripts or the approach and whatnot from there?
Sure. Let's say we're going into the needs analysis and we're asking questions of the prospect. And it can even start at the beginning of the conversation. So instead of asking things like, so how's the weather? Or the default is, if you're talking to a man, talk about sports because most men like sports. Find out what their favorite sport of choice. And I've actually worked for organizations that they have their walls of their pit lined with televisions, and they're all turned to Sports Center. So the natural inclination is, well, let me go ahead and talk to this prospect about sports, whether it's golf or football or basketball. When women are allowed to bring their authentic self to the conversation, they then have permission to dig a little deeper and let me find some commonalities that we both share that's not necessarily the status quo. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I mean, I also kind of seem like that effort you put in, the research and kind of finding the not the sports reference, also goes in hand with building that relationship, right?
Yes.
We could both like the Lakers and talk all day long about that, but I would also talk to a random person at a bar about that, and we could also have zero meaning to that afterwards. But if we talked about our view on, maybe touchy topic, our view on religion, and that's a conversation I would remember, good or
Yes.
bad, right? It's just like
right, good or bad.
tangible, yeah.
And you can ask questions about their kids and find out. So, this weekend is going to be rainy. Are you more of a honey-do list kind of guy, or are you going to be a Netflix binge on the couch kind of guy? Or what are you going to watch? Talk about what interests them, but be creative. And when you know yourself and you know your style, then you can bring your personality to the conversation and realize, women, that you're good enough. So when someone tells you that being different is wrong, that is wrong. Don't let anyone tell you that you're being different or your sales style, just because it's different, is wrong. As long as you get the end result, be yourself and do it.
Absolutely. And you probably want to be, do you feel like organizations are opening up to it's less about the follow our exact playbook and more about the results?
No. What I find when I go into companies and deliver the women in sales training that we create is that they all have playbooks, they all have scripts. And because sales managers and sales coaches haven't been coached on how to let their reps run with it, they default to, this is what the playbook says, follow this.
Yeah, my biggest gripe with that playbook approach and script approach, I think it just doesn't get up in at a company internally. It doesn't get updated enough. Like, forget if it's women or for men. Like, that playbook that's working, or like that people are spending every day executing, probably hasn't been looked at in like a year or two, and that's a long time, right?
Yes.
I think, in my opinion, an effective sales organization should be optimizing that every quarter, and every month the sales manager should be implementing that. And so to absolutely, and then to give them a little bit of freedom to be like, okay, you personality X, go do it the way you do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or teaching them how to think critically and creatively.
Mm-hmm.
So say, here is the end result. This is what we want to accomplish through this needs analysis or through overcoming objections. How is it that you, Miss Rep or Mr. Rep, how would you do it?
Gotcha.
Reverse engineering that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then coach them through that the right way, or how to kind of get to that end result.
Yes.
I love that. So I want to ask you one more question, and this is kind of a big one, at least in my mind. So you're getting people, you're getting folks in women into sales organization. You're adjusting it from the top down. I feel like you kind of got a lot of the angles covered. But let's say a woman, woman in a sales force, how do they manage up? And also, like, communicate with, like, I guess, yeah, let's start with manage up. And I want to talk about the team element too, with a more dominant male team, and how that looks like too.
Okay. The first thing I have to say is that back in the South, they have an expression that says, a closed mouth never gets fed. So the first thing I need for women to do is to speak up about what they want. I did a panel discussion last year in California, and it was a panel of male sales leaders, VPs of sales and above. And I asked them, if a man comes to you and says that he's an individual contributor and he wants to go into sales management, what do you coach him on? And the men around the table said P&L reporting, forecasting, the numbers side, the quantitative things. And I said, if a woman individual contributor comes to you and she wants to go into sales leadership, what do you coach her on? First thing they said was confidence. Second thing they said was emotional intelligence. And then they listed a whole bunch of soft skills. And I said, why the discrepancy? And no one could give me an answer. So for women that want to manage up, realize that you are managing up against a system that is likely flawed through no fault of their own. It's just the way it's always been done. So you have to realize that you may have to challenge the status quo and say, is the path to sales leadership the same for everybody? And if it's not, then why not? So it's a matter of minding the gap. What gaps are in place that I need to be aware of so that I can overcome, so that I can manage all facets of my career?
Yeah, it sounds completely unfair, but it's one of those hard conversations that needs to be had to be able to surpass that like glass ceiling, and or just move up and change things.
Yes.
One company at a time at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah. And
sales leader at a time.
It's funny that you said like the men, like people said for women to be a leader, they need emotional intelligence. I feel like generally speaking, women have like 10 times the emotional intelligence that a male counterpart would have.
But that's just the paradigm of the men at the table.
Yeah.
Their paradigm is that women need coaching, their women need coaching in emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So it's up to the women to say, okay, well, this is their reality, and their reality are their facts. So how do I navigate that in order to get what's mutually beneficial?
Awesome. All right. That was that totally helps. And nothing you said here is easy, right? Like you didn't say it's going to be easy, but I think changing mentalities, changing habits, changing culture, and people's mindsets never an easy thing. But I mean, just from my exposure to kind of the just women in the workplace and the changes happened over the last 5 to 7 years, it looks like it's working, right? Like I can't wait for the next like I want to skip to like 5 or 10 years from now and just kind of glimpse of what, like just peek through the blinds and see what there is.
Yes.
But
it's exciting.
Hard work. Yeah. So really appreciate you having you here, as well as just what you're doing. It's a really big movement and a lot of hard work, but anything we can do to support that, we're all about that.
Thank you. I encourage anyone that is watching. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. And then for those who are interested in joining the 14,000 women in NAWSP, we'd love to have you. NAWSP.org.
Awesome. And we'll link to the to your LinkedIn and to the NAWSP in the show notes here, so it'll make it a little easier for you to join. Awesome. Thanks, Cynthia.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.